The story you're about to hear is a deep reflection on the weight of a parent's dream. We believe every child deserves the freedom to find their own path, and we would be honored if you shared your thoughts on this with our community in the comments. To continue these emotional journeys together, we hope you'll subscribe. And now let's listen. My son-in-law looked at his daughter, and he did not see a child. He saw a second chance. He saw a vessel for his own broken dreams, a way to reclaim the glory that a cruel twist of fate had stolen from him. He loved her, I have no doubt, but his love was a heavy, suffocating thing conditional on her victory and measured in trophies. I am a retired school principal. For 40 years, my world was the delicate ecosystem of a child's potential. I learned to read the subtle signs of distress, to see the light in a child's eyes dim when the pressure became too much, and I saw the light dimming in my granddaughter Maya. She was a brilliant, gifted girl with a mind that danced with stars and scientific theories, but her father was forcing her onto a tennis court, demanding a perfection that was crushing her spirit. I tried to speak, I tried to warn them, but I was dismissed as an old man, a relic from a gentle, outdated world who was meddling in their parenting style. They told me I didn't understand the sacrifices required for greatness. They didn't understand that the sacrifice they were making was their own daughter's soul. I knew I had to find a way to intervene to expose the emotional abuse that was disguised as love before my granddaughter forgot the brilliant, joyful girl she was meant to be. My life for 4 decades was governed by the ringing of bells, the bell to start the day, the bell to change classes, the bell that signaled the joyful, chaotic release of 3,000 young minds back into the world. As the principal of Northwood High, I was the quiet custodian of a universe of potential. My office was a sanctuary for the struggling, a launch pad for the brilliant, and a place of reckoning for the misguided. My greatest joy was watching a child discover their passion, that unique spark that would illuminate the rest of their lives. Now, in the quiet landscape of my retirement, the only bell that rings is the gentle chime of the grandfather clock in my hallway. My days are my own, filled with books, my garden, and the immeasurable joy of my granddaughter Maya. Maya is 13, and she possesses a mind that is quite simply a marvel. She doesn't just learn, she consumes knowledge. She builds intricate Lego models of distant galaxies, she writes poetry that is wise beyond her years, and she reads books on quantum physics for fun. When she is here in the quiet of my study, her face alight with the thrill of a new idea, I see a future scientist, a poet, a thinker. I see a limitless horizon. But her father, my son-in-law Mark, sees a different horizon. He sees a tennis court. Mark had been a rising star in the collegiate tennis world, a young man with a powerful serve and a future that seemed destined for Wimbledon. Then came a catastrophic knee injury in his final year, a single sickening twist that ended his career before it had truly begun. The ambition, the ferocious, all-consuming drive that had propelled him had nowhere to go. It curdled inside him, waiting. And then Maya was born. He started her on the court when she was 4. By the time she was 10, her life was a grueling, relentless schedule of drills, practice, and tournaments. Her childhood was not measured in sleepovers and birthday parties, but in rankings and service percentages. My daughter Helen, a gentle soul who had always been swept along by Mark's powerful personality, became the logistics manager for this burgeoning career, juggling schedules, diets, and travel, all with a strained, determined smile. The conflict, which had been a low, rumbling earthquake for years, finally erupted one Sunday evening. I had gone to their house for dinner. Maya was late to the table. She stumbled in from a 5-hour practice session, her face pale with exhaustion, her tennis whites stained with clay and sweat. She had a science textbook clutched in her hand. "Maya, what is that?" Mark asked, his voice sharp. "You should be stretching, not filling your head with that stuff." It's a project for school, Dad, she mumbled, her eyes on her plate. It's about stellar nucleosynthesis. It's due Tuesday. Your only project is the Henderson Jr. Open next weekend, Mark said, his voice cold. Your grades are fine, A's and B's. That's good enough. You can't be the best if you're distracted. But I love this stuff, she whispered so quietly I almost didn't hear it. It's about how stars are born. You want to know how stars are born, Mark said with a harsh laugh. They're born on the court. They're born from sweat and sacrifice and winning. Everything else is a distraction. He took the textbook from her limp hand and set it aside, a gesture of absolute casual dismissal. I watched the light in Maya's eyes die. It was a sight I knew all too well from my years as a principal, the moment a child's spirit gives way to a parent's will. I could not remain silent. Mark! I said, my voice quiet but firm. The girl is exhausted. She needs balance. She needs to be a child. Her education is more important than any tournament. Mark turned his gaze to me, and his eyes were hard. With all due respect, Alistair, he said, calling me by my first name, a thing he rarely did. You don't know what you're talking about. You live in a world of participation trophies and safe spaces. This is the real world. This is what it takes to be a champion. I'm her father. I know what's best for her. I'm her grandfather, I countered, and I know what a distressed child looks like. Dad, please, Helen cut in, her voice pleading. She looked at me, then at her husband, a human bridge trying to span an impossible divide. This is our parenting style. We believe in pushing Maya to achieve her potential. You're from a different generation. You don't understand the level of commitment it takes these days. My parenting style, a different generation. The familiar polite words used to build a wall to dismiss my 40 years of experience in child development as irrelevant. They weren't just disagreeing with me, they were invalidating me. They were telling me that my concern was meddling, that my wisdom was senility. I looked at Maya. She was staring at her plate, her small shoulders slumped in defeat. She was a prisoner in the kingdom of her father's ambition. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that this was more than just an overbearing parent. This was a quiet, insidious form of emotional abuse, a relentless pressure that was slowly crushing my granddaughter's soul. And I, the old meddling principal, had just been told to stand down. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. The bell had rung and I had a child to save. In the weeks that followed that disastrous dinner, I shifted from concerned grandfather to quiet observer. I was a principal once more, walking the silent hallways of my family, looking for the subtle signs of a student in crisis. The signs were everywhere, if you knew how to look. My first call was to Maya's school, to her science teacher, a bright young woman named Ms. Albright, whom I had hired years ago. I framed it as a casual check-in from a proud grandfather. "How is Maya doing in your class, Jennifer?" I asked. There was a hesitant pause on the other end of the line. "Dr. Finch, it's good to hear from you," she said, her voice careful. "Maya, she's a brilliant girl, one of the most naturally inquisitive minds I've ever taught. But honestly, this semester she seems absent. Her homework is often late or incomplete. She used to be the first to raise her hand, and now she barely participates. I've tried to talk to her, but she's very withdrawn." She lowered her voice slightly. "Her parents sent me an email at the beginning of the year explaining that her extracurricular commitments were her top priority, and that while they expected her to pass, they didn't want her to be unduly stressed by academic pressures." It was a very unusual email. Extracurricular commitments. They were framing her passion as a chore and her father's obsession as her career. My next step was to witness one of these commitments for myself. I went to one of Maya's practice sessions at the exclusive tennis club where Mark was a member. I sat in the stands, a solitary figure in a sea of empty seats, and I watched. What I saw was not coaching. It was a relentless psychological assault. Mark wasn't a father. He was a drill sergeant. Every missed shot was met with a sharp, cutting remark. Sloppy footwork. Maya, are you even trying? That was a gift. You just handed her the point. Focus. Don't you dare cry. Crying is for losers. There was no encouragement, no praise for effort, only a brutal transactional form of love, conditional on her performance. When she did, by some miracle, hit a perfect cross-court winner, his only comment was, "Good. Do that again. Every time." He was not building a player. He was programming a machine. The most damning piece of evidence, however, came from Maya herself, though she never intended for me to see it. Helen had asked me to pick up a jacket Maya had left at my house. When I went into her room to retrieve it, I saw a sketchbook lying open on her desk. I knew I shouldn't look, but a grandfather's worry is a powerful force. It was not a sketchbook of galaxies or flowers. It was a prison journal. Page after page was filled with dark, tormented drawings. A girl with a tennis racket shaped like a cage. A stick figure of a father with a monstrous shouting mouth. A small weeping girl hiding under a bed. And on the last page, a single heartbreaking sentence written in a child's desperate scrawl, "I wish I could just disappear." I closed the book, my hands trembling. This was no longer just a case of an overbearing father. This was a child in profound emotional distress, a child who felt trapped, hopeless, and invisible. The final straw came a few days later. Helen called, her voice buzzing with an excitement that made my blood run cold. "Dad, you're not going to believe it," she gushed. "Maya has been invited to the National Junior Invitational. It's in Florida, a 3-week tournament. It's the biggest event of the year for her age group." 3 weeks, I asked, my voice tight. That's in the middle of the school semester. "Well, that's the other amazing news," Helen continued, completely missing my tone. "The head of the Kincaid Tennis Academy, one of the best sports academies in the country, saw her play last month. He called Mark. They're offering her a full scholarship. She could leave Northwood and train there full-time. She could live and breathe tennis. This is it, Dad. This is her shot. This is the path to the pros. The path to the pros." It was a one-way ticket out of her childhood, an official end to her education, a final irrevocable surrender to her father's dream. They were presenting it as the opportunity of a lifetime. I knew it was a life sentence. I had to act. My quiet observations and gentle probing had failed. My son-in-law was a zealot, and my daughter was his willing accomplice. They would not be swayed by reason or by a grandfather's plea. To save Maya, I could not just be an observer. I had to become a strategist. I had to change the game. In my years as a principal, I learned that a direct confrontation with a determined, unreasonable parent is often a futile exercise. You cannot reason with a belief system that is immune to facts. Mark's belief in Maya's tennis destiny was a religion, and he was its high priest. To challenge him directly would only make him a martyr in his own eyes and in Helen's. I needed a different approach. I needed to create a situation where the truth would reveal itself not through my words, but through an undeniable public event. I needed an ally, and I needed an arena. The ally was the first most difficult piece to secure. I needed someone whose authority Mark and Helen could not dismiss. A fellow parent or a teacher wouldn't be enough. I needed a titan, a respected voice from within their own world of competitive sports. My mind went back years to a difficult situation at Northwood High with a promising young basketball player who was being pushed to the breaking point by his father. I had sought advice from a woman named Dr. Elizabeth Reed, a nationally renowned child psychologist who specialized in the pressures of youth sports. She was a brilliant, compassionate woman who had a reputation for being a fierce advocate for the well-being of young athletes. I hadn't spoken to her in a decade, but I still had her number. I made the call. I laid out the entire situation for her, my voice low and urgent. I told her about Mark's history, Maya's academic brilliance, the grueling schedule, the verbal abuse I had witnessed, and the heartbreaking drawings in the sketchbook. I spoke not as a grandfather, but as a professional educator presenting a case study of a child in crisis. Dr. Reed listened patiently, her silence, a comforting, intelligent presence on the other end of the line. When I was finished, her voice was calm, but laced with a cold anger. "Alistair, what you're describing is a classic case of vicarious ambition, and it is absolutely a form of emotional abuse." She said, her words a profound validation of my fears. The father is projecting his own failed identity onto the child. Her success becomes his redemption, and her failure becomes his personal shame. It's an unbearable weight for a child to carry. "What can I do?" I asked. "They won't listen to me. They call it meddling." "You're right, a direct confrontation will fail," she said. "We need to create a moment of public accountability, a moment where the narrative shifts from a dedicated father to a dangerously obsessive coach. And we need to give Maya a safe space to find her own voice." And then she told me the most fortuitous news. Dr. Reed was on the advisory board for the United States Tennis Association's Youth Development Program, and she was scheduled to be a keynote speaker and an official observer at the National Junior Invitational in Florida. She was already going to be there. "This is what we will do," she said, her voice taking on the tone of a brilliant strategist. And she laid out the plan. My gambit. The arena would be the tournament. It was the temple at which Mark worshipped. It was there in his holy of holies that his faith would be tested. My role was the most delicate of all. I had to speak with Maya, not to convince her to quit, not to tell her what to do, but to give her something she hadn't had in years, a choice. I found her a few days later at the local library, a place she used to love, but now only visited to find a quiet place to do the homework she was too exhausted to do at home. She looked small and tired under the fluorescent lights. I sat down opposite her. I didn't mention the tournament or her father or tennis. I talked about her science project. I asked her about the latest book she was reading. For a few minutes I saw a flicker of the old, brilliant, joyful Maya, the girl who loved to learn. Then I looked her directly in the eye. "Maya," I said softly, "I know this is hard. I know the pressure you're under. And I want you to know something. I am proud of you, not because of your wins or your ranking. I am proud of you for the person you are, for your kind heart and your brilliant mind." Tears welled in her eyes. It was probably the first time in years someone had praised her for something other than her backhand. "You have a choice, sweetheart," I continued, "no matter what anyone tells you. This is your life, not your father's. And if you ever decide that you want to choose a different path, if you ever feel like you can't take it anymore, I will be there. I will be in the stands in Florida. And if you need a way out, you just have to look at me. I will handle the rest. I will catch you. I promise." I was not telling her to fail. I was giving her permission to be free. I was offering her a sanctuary, a safe space in the middle of a war zone. I didn't know if she would take it, but I had placed my piece on the board. A quiet, hopeful, grandfather-shaped pawn ready to protect his queen. The Kincaid Tennis Academy in Florida was a sprawling, sun-drenched complex that felt more like a factory than a school. The air was filled with the rhythmic thwack of tennis balls and the shouts of coaches. Young, determined faces, some no older than 10, moved with a single-minded purpose. It was a place where childhoods were traded for a shot at glory. It was Mark's paradise. The day of Maya's first big match in the tournament was hot and humid. The stands around the court were filled with parents, coaches, and scouts, a nervous, buzzing hive of vicarious ambition. I found a seat in the top row, a quiet, anonymous spectator. Dr. Reed was seated a few sections over, posing as a USTA official, her presence unnoticed by anyone but me. Helen and Mark sat in the front row, right by the court. Mark was in full coach mode, leaning forward, his body tense, living every point. Helen sat beside him, wringing her hands, her face a mask of anxiety. Maya walked onto the court. She looked small and lost in the vast expanse of green. She went through her warm-up, her movements fluid and practiced, but her eyes were empty. She was a machine executing her programming. The match began. Maya was playing a slightly older, more powerful girl from California. From the first serve, it was clear Maya was outmatched, not in skill but in spirit. Her shots lacked their usual precision. Her footwork was a fraction too slow. She was playing without joy, without fire. She was playing like a girl who wished she were anywhere else in the world. Mark's frustration grew with every lost point. His voice a low, intense growl carried across the court. "Move your feet, Maya. Anticipate. What was that shot? You're giving it away. Do you even want to be here?" With each outburst, Maya seemed to shrink her shoulders, slumping her movements, becoming more timid. Helen would put a restraining hand on her husband's arm, but he would shake it off, his eyes glued to the court, to his failing dream. Maya lost the first set 6-2. As she walked to the sideline to towel off, Mark was there, his face a thundercloud. He wasn't comforting her. He was interrogating her. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see the furious stabbing gestures, the way Maya flinched and looked at the ground. The second set was even worse. Maya was unraveling, making unforced errors, her spirit completely broken. The score was 5-1. It was match point for her opponent. The crowd was quiet, anticipating the inevitable end. Her opponent served. It was a strong, fast serve. Maya's return was weak, a soft lob that barely cleared the net. The other girl smashed it for an easy winner. The match was over. A smattering of polite applause broke the silence. But Mark was not applauding. He was on his feet, his face contorted with a rage so pure it was terrifying. He didn't wait for Maya to come to him. He strode onto the court. He grabbed his daughter, his own 13-year-old daughter, by the arm, his fingers digging into her skin. "What was that?" He snarled, his voice a low, vicious sound that still carried in the shocked silence. "You embarrassed me. You embarrassed yourself. All that work, all that sacrifice. For this, you just gave up." People were staring now. The other parents, the officials. The public facade of the perfect tennis family was cracking. Maya just stood there, tears streaming down her face, her body limp in his grasp. And then she did something I had been praying for. She lifted her head, and her eyes, filled with a desperate, silent plea, found mine in the stands. It was the signal. It was my move. I was already moving, descending the steep stairs of the stands, my old legs surprisingly steady. As I reached the court, a new voice, calm and authoritative, cut through the tense atmosphere. "Mr. Jensen," the voice said. It was Dr. Reed. She had come down from the stands and was standing at the umpire's chair, a USTA official's badge hanging around her neck. "I think your daughter has had enough for one day." Mark whirled around, surprised by the official intervention. "Who are you?" "This is a family matter." "I am Dr. Elizabeth Reed with the USTA's Youth Development Program," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "And what I am seeing right now is a potential violation of our code of conduct regarding unsportsmanlike behavior from a parent." At that moment I reached them. I gently but firmly placed my hand on Mark's, the one that was still gripping Maya's arm. "Let her go, Mark," I said, my voice quiet but unyielding. He looked at me, then at Dr. Reed, then at the dozens of staring faces in the crowd. He was trapped. The referee was there. Other officials were approaching. His private kingdom of the tennis court had suddenly become a very public courtroom, and he was the one on trial. He released Maya's arm as if it were a hot coal. Maya ran to me, burying her face in my chest, her small body racked with sobs. I wrapped my arms around her, holding her tight. "It's over, sweetheart," I whispered into her hair. "It's over now. I've got you." Dr. Reed addressed the small crowd of officials and reporters who had gathered. "Let this be a lesson to all of us," she said, her voice ringing with a clear, powerful authority. "The goal of youth sports is to build character, not to break spirits. The line between dedication and abuse is one we must never allow to be crossed." The narrative had been reframed. The story was no longer about a disappointing loss. It was about a courageous girl and an overbearing father. Mark stood alone on the court, his rage replaced by a dawning, horrified understanding of what he had just done. His dream had not just died, it had exploded, taking his reputation and his relationship with his daughter with it. Checkmate. The fallout from the tournament was a quiet, devastating storm. The incident, witnessed by dozens of parents and officials, became a local scandal, a cautionary tale whispered in the exclusive corridors of the youth tennis world. Mark was formally reprimanded by the USTA and quietly asked to step back from any official coaching roles. His reputation, the one he had so carefully crafted, was in tatters, but the public humiliation was nothing compared to the private reckoning that was to come. Helen, my daughter, had watched the entire scene unfold from the stands, her face a mask of frozen horror. For years she had existed in a state of willful blindness, convincing herself that Mark's intensity was passion, that his pressure was love, that Maya's unhappiness was just the normal price of greatness. But seeing her husband grab her daughter with such fury in public had been a clarifying, brutal moment. The justifications she had built around her life had been demolished. She brought Maya to my house the day after we returned from Florida. It was a silent, somber drive. When they arrived, Helen looked like a woman who had aged a decade in a single weekend. "I didn't see it," she whispered, sitting at my kitchen table while Maya was upstairs in her old room, finally sleeping a deep, exhausted sleep. Or maybe I didn't want to see it. It was easier to believe in his dream. It was easier than fighting him. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a profound, soul-deep shame. "You tried to tell me, Dad, and I called you a meddler. I'm so sorry." "You were trying to hold your family together, Helen," I said gently. "But a family held together by fear is not a family. It's a hostage situation." That conversation was the beginning of a long, difficult process of healing. At my urging, they started family counseling. I did not attend. This was their battle to fight. Mark, stripped of his ambition, and his anger was forced to confront the ghost of his own failed dream, to understand how he had projected it onto his daughter, nearly crushing her in the process. It was a painful, arduous journey for him, a journey into a past he had tried to outrun. But the true transformation was in Maya. Freed from the relentless pressure of the court, she began to blossom. She returned to Northwood High, re-enrolling in the advanced science and literature classes she had been forced to abandon. The light returned to her eyes. She started to laugh again, a sound I realized I hadn't truly heard in years. She filled her sketchbooks not with images of cages and monsters, but with detailed drawings of nebulae and the intricate anatomy of a flower. She was rediscovering her own dream. The following spring I attended the Northwood High Science Fair. It was held in the gymnasium, a place that had once been the scene of my own professional life. But tonight I was not a principal. I was just a grandfather. Maya's project was the star of the show. It was a brilliant, complex, and beautifully rendered presentation on the life cycle of stars, complete with a handcrafted model of a solar system. She stood beside it, her face alight with a passion and confidence that was more dazzling than any championship trophy. She explained her work to the judges and the crowds with an eloquence and intelligence that made my heart swell with pride. I saw Mark and Helen standing at the back of the crowd. They were holding hands. Mark was not the intense, glowering coach from the sidelines. He was just a father watching his daughter shine his face, a mixture of awe, pride, and a lingering, quiet sadness for all the time he had lost. After she had finished her presentation, Maya saw me and her face broke into a wide, beautiful smile. She ran over and hugged me. "Did you see Grandpa?" she whispered excitedly. "They asked me about red giants." "I saw," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You were magnificent, a real champion." She looked up at me, her eyes clear and bright. "This is my court," she said with a quiet certainty that told me everything I needed to know. I looked over her head at Mark and Helen. Mark met my gaze and gave a slow, respectful nod. It was not a victory for me over him. It was a victory for Maya. A victory for the brilliant, joyful girl who had finally been allowed to choose her own game, and that I knew was the only victory that had ever truly mattered. If this story resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who believes in letting children find their own path. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.